You know, there are moments in life, kind of like when you're looking at an old photograph and suddenly notice a detail you'd never seen before. Until that moment, everything's normal, just the way it's supposed to be. Then that one little detail changes the whole picture, the entire memory, maybe even your whole past. For Brenda, that moment arrived under the dim light of her kitchen table, with a stark white credit card statement in her hand. David. David. Brenda's husband of 20 years. Dependable, predictable, and maybe just a little bit boring. He was like the Sunday morning paper he always read. The headlines might change, but the story was always the same. Brenda loved that routine. She loved this small, safe kingdom she had built with her own hands, a place where she knew every corner. David's accounting conference in Reno was just another one of his usual, boring business trips. Or so she thought. But that statement, Peppermill Resort Spa, you know the type of place where the lights never dim and where hopes and regrets are decided by the same roll of the dice, a world away from the Holiday Inn David had mentioned. And then the charge, luxury suite with panoramic view and champagne dinner for two. That's how life is sometimes. The biggest lies are hidden between the smallest numbers. In that moment, I felt something inside Brenda just snap. The walls of that quiet, orderly kingdom she had built began to crack. That 4-hour drive, that hypnotizingly straight stretch of Route 80, it was more than enough time to turn every speck of doubt in her mind into pure rage. Her knuckles, white from gripping the steering wheel, told the real story of how fragile the life she had built on her husband's loyalty really was. And there it was, Reno. Its neon lights glowed in the middle of the desert like a sinful promise. Peppermill. Even the name felt like a mockery. As she walked through the hotel lobby, the sound of people laughing echoed in her ears like screams. When she told the young man at the reception her husband's name and room number, saying, "It's a family emergency, and I think I left my key in the room," the tremor in her voice carried the weight of a 20-year marriage. As the elevator climbed to the top floor, the soft chime at each level felt like a knife twisting in her heart. She hesitated for a moment at the suite's door. You know that moment, the last second before you learn the truth. In that single second, there's still hope. There's still that tiny fragile belief that it could all be a misunderstanding. But life usually demands that you open the door. And she did. The cold click of the backup keycard was the sound of an era ending. The scene inside, oh, that scene. The city lights poured through the massive window, turning everything into a romantic painting. And right in the middle of that painting were two naked bodies tangled together. Her husband, David, and her own sister, Sarah, the one she considered her own flesh and blood. The silence was so heavy, the only thing Brenda could hear was the sound of her own heart shattering into a million pieces. The final curtain had fallen in Reno, and when the play was over, there was no one left to applaud. In moments of absolute shock, time does this weird thing where it bends. Seconds stretch into hours. Sounds become muffled. It's like the whole world is underwater. For Brenda, that room in that moment was exactly that place. What she left behind that door wasn't just two naked bodies, but the wreckage of a 20-year life, of shared dreams and a trust she thought was unshakable. She didn't even hear the frantic scrambling inside, the rustle of sheets, the whispered names. None of it could pierce the deafening silence inside her. That's life for you. Sometimes the biggest storms are the ones that tear through your soul without making a sound. When David appeared at the door, having hastily thrown on a bathrobe, he wore that classic, pathetic look, that ugly mix of guilt and fear.
Brenda, honey, it's not what it looks like, he stammered. Ah, those magic words. It's not what it looks like. As if betrayal were a simple math problem that could be understood if explained with the right words. Brenda didn't even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on her sister, sitting on the edge of the bed behind him, wrapped in a sheet. Sarah, her partner in childhood memories, summer vacations, and shared secrets. She wouldn't meet Brenda's gaze. I've learned that the most painful part of betrayal isn't the lie itself, but the fact that the liar can't find the courage to look you in the eye. It's the shame that really burns. A sound, more like a breath, escaped Brenda's lips. Not anger, not disappointment, just pure exhaustion. Why? She whispered. That one word question echoed off the walls of that luxury suite, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Why? You, Sarah. David tried to interject. I can explain everything. It was a mistake. But Brenda just raised a hand, silencing him. Her gaze was still locked on her sister. In that moment, the room had become a courtroom. The defendants were clear. The crime was clear. The verdict had already been delivered. And then something inside Brenda broke. But it wasn't a sob. Instead, a cold, calm smile spread across her face. It was that unsettling kind of smile, the last stop before pain turns into madness. She turned to David and spoke in a voice as cold as ice. Get dressed, she said. Her voice was so clear and devoid of emotion that David flinched. I don't want to see all of this misery. Then she looked at Sarah again. When you come over to Mom and Dad's for Thanksgiving, don't forget to bring the gravy, okay? Yours has always been my favorite. And that moment, that was more devastating than anything else in the room. She had just plunged the normality of a future family dinner, an American classic, right into the heart of this abnormality, like a knife. This wasn't forgiveness. It was a brutal truth thrown in their faces. This life we built, this family, these traditions, they're all just a lie now. Brenda turned her back and walked, silently, to the elevator, just as she had come. As the doors closed, for the first time in her life, she saw the desperation on the faces of her husband and her sister. But it gave her no satisfaction because, the silent screams are the loudest. And Brenda's soul was screaming so loud, no one could ever hear it.
The hardest part of betrayal is those first few moments, when you're left alone with it. The adrenaline fades, the anger subsides, and all that's left is this vast, bone-deep emptiness. As the fake glitter of Reno shrank and vanished in her rearview mirror, that's exactly what swallowed Brenda whole. The inside of that car had become a silent shrine to a shattered life. The 4-hour drive there, fueled by rage and adrenaline, had felt like seconds. But the drive back, that drive felt like a lifetime. Every single mile marker seemed like a monument to the life she had left behind. The small, sleepy towns she passed, the abandoned diners on the side of the road, they all seemed to scream her own loneliness and abandonment back at her. Her mind just kept wandering through the wreckage of her memories. Her first date with David, the hot dogs they ate at that cheap baseball game, the proud glimmer in her father's eye on their wedding day, the dreams she and her sister Sarah had concocted in the backyard as kids. I've learned that in moments like these, your memory is both your closest friend and your most brutal enemy. It reminds you of everything you had, only so you can see more clearly what you've just lost. At one point, she pulled over at a roadside rest stop.
She just stopped. She cut the engine, and when the headlights died, a pitch black desert darkness fell over her. The sky was blanketed with millions of stars, endless, indifferent, and magnificent. Brenda realized how small, how insignificant she felt in that moment. Her 20-year marriage, all of her pain, wasn't even a speck of dust in this universe. And oddly enough, that thought gave her a strange sense of peace. The pain didn't shrink, but it transformed. It became more manageable. That's just how life is, isn't it? Sometimes in the middle of the deepest pain, you gain a new perspective when you least expect it. That moment was a turning point for Brenda. This was her pain, her story, not David's, not Sarah's, hers alone. And she was the only one who could decide how the next chapter would be written. When she turned the key in the ignition again, the sound of the engine felt different. It wasn't the sound of an escape, but of a beginning, the beginning of a journey. She didn't know where she was going. The place she had called home was now nothing more than a graveyard of memories. But for the first time since she'd walked into that hotel room, she thought about the next step, not just surviving the moment, but about tomorrow. As the first rays of dawn began to rise over the California hills, she saw that famous sign on the side of the highway, Route 66, the Mother Road, America's legendary highway of dreams and disappearances. On a sudden impulse, she jerked the wheel and took the exit. It wasn't a planned move. It was a whisper from her soul, a desire to leave the familiar road and turn down a path she'd never taken before. In that moment, Brenda wasn't choosing the shiny facade of the American dream. She was choosing its abandoned, dusty backroads because she knew that if she was going to build a new life from her own wreckage, she first had to get lost, completely and irrevocably.
You know, Route 66 has a way about it. It doesn't just take you from one place to another, sometimes it takes you exactly where you need to be, to that inevitable stop where you have to face yourself. For Brenda, that stop came the moment the last drop of gas in her tank ran out, at the same time as the last drop of hope in her soul. It was called the Dusty Spoon Diner. You know the type of place, the kind where time itself decided to pull over and take a rest. The sign creaks in the wind, and the bell on the door has been ringing the same note for years. They don't just sell food, they offer a momentary sanctuary and a hot cup of coffee to weary souls. When Brenda let herself fall onto a stool covered in cracked red vinyl, her movements were mechanical. It was as if her body was a puppet and there was no one left holding the strings. She looked around. The yellowed photos hanging on the wall showed a bygone American dream. Happy families, shiny cars. Every single frame was like a ghost of the life Brenda had lost. The old woman behind the counter was the kind whose every wrinkle told a life story. Her apron said Peggy. She didn't even ask what Brenda wanted. She just placed a heavy porcelain mug in front of her and filled it with fresh, steaming coffee. "Looks like it's been a long night," Peggy said, her voice gravelly like stones, but gentle all the same. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Brenda just nodded. She didn't have the strength to speak. She was afraid that if she did, the silent screams inside her would finally break through the dam and come flooding out. "I've learned that in your darkest moments, it's not the grand miracles or the fancy words that save you. No, sometimes it's just a hot cup of coffee and a pair of eyes that don't judge." After a little while, Peggy came back with a plate. On it was a slice of homemade peach pie, fragrant with cinnamon, the edges just slightly burnt. She set it down gently in front of Brenda. "This one's on the house," Peggy said softly. "Good for a weary traveler."
Brenda's eyes were glued to that plate. This simple, unexpected act of kindness, it was so different from the fake luxury of that hotel suite where she'd been betrayed. This was so real. The pure humanity she hadn't received from her husband of 20 years or from the sister who shared her blood, she was now receiving from a stranger. A single tear escaped and fell on the rim of her coffee cup. But this wasn't a tear of pain. It was a tear of gratitude. The first bite of that pie, that taste, it wasn't just peach and cinnamon. It was her grandmother's kitchen. It was the carefree summer days of her childhood. It was a time before she even knew what betrayal meant. That's how life is. Sometimes a single taste, a single smell can remind you of who you used to be. In that moment, in that dusty diner, something shifted for Brenda. That pie wasn't just food, it was an anchor that kept her from drowning in the whirlpool of her own sorrow. It was the first spark in the ashes, a faint but stubborn reminder that the world could still be a place where good people lived, that kindness still existed. Brenda finished her pie and drank her coffee. She left a $20 bill on the counter. She looked at Peggy, and for the first time in what felt like years, she gave a genuine smile. No words were needed. In that moment, those two women had said everything there was to say about all the bitterness and sweetness of life. As she walked back to her car, she was no longer running from the wreckage. She was driving toward a new life, with no idea where she was going, but with the resolve that comes from having taken the very first step.
You know, when a wound starts to heal, first it itches. The wounds of the soul are just like that. And for Brenda, that long journey was exactly that, the itch of the past. The pain was slowly giving way to a quiet acceptance, and the anger to a calm curiosity. She was no longer asking, why me? Instead, a new question was beginning to sprout in her mind. What now? That's how life is. Sometimes you don't know where you're going, but your heart whispers to you where you need to stop. For Brenda, that place turned out to be a small Oregon town, caressed by the cool winds of the Pacific Ocean. Maybe after the burning truth of the Nevada desert, she needed the clean, forgiving scent of the sea. She rented a small house. Its garden was overgrown with weeds, neglected for years, just like her own life. At first, she didn't even want to look at it. The chaos, the abandonment, it just reminded her of the wreckage inside her. But one morning, as she sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, her eye caught a single rose, stubbornly craning its neck through the weeds. It was faded, its petals frayed, but it was still alive. In that moment, that rose was her reflection in the mirror. And that day, something changed. I've learned that it's when you hit rock bottom that you get closest to the earth. Brenda plunged her hands into the soil. She pulled out those weeds one by one, not with anger, but with an effort to understand. It was as if each root represented a pain, a regret from her past. As she tore them from the earth, she felt like she was clearing her own soul of its poisonous vines. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Brenda's garden was transforming right along with her. She tilled the soil, she planted new seeds. Tomatoes, cucumbers, colorful flowers. This wasn't just gardening, it was therapy. It was a tangible way of taking back control of her own life. Every seed she planted was a hope she was planting for the future. She was relearning how to wait, how to be patient, and how to understand that growth takes time. She set up a small stall at the town's farmer's market and started selling the fresh, fragrant produce she had grown herself. She talked to people, she smiled, she listened to their stories.
She was no longer David's wife or Sarah's sister. She was the woman with the delicious tomatoes. She was Brenda. She was recreating her own identity from the soil with her own two hands. One day, a middle aged man with calloused hands and kind, smiling eyes pulled up to her stall in a beat up pickup truck. His name was Frank. He was a local carpenter. He offered to build her a sturdier stand for her stall. It wasn't a flirtatious offer. Just like Peggy's peach pie, it was a simple act of kindness. And this time, Brenda was able to accept that kindness without fear, without suspicion. Forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't something you do for the other person. It's how you set your own soul free. In that garden, with her hands in the soil, Brenda forgave David and Sarah. Not because she thought they were right, not even because she understood them, but simply because she didn't want to carry that heavy burden anymore. She had realized that there was no point in wandering through the barren land someone else had scourged when she could be tending her own garden.
Thanksgiving. In the heart of America, this day holds a special place. It's a day when family comes together, when you look for reasons to be grateful, when traditions are kept alive. But for Brenda, for so many years, that day had been nothing more than a stage play where a painful lie was performed. A play where everyone knew their lines, but no one was genuinely happy. She remembered last Thanksgiving. It was just a few weeks after that disaster in Reno. She had sat at her mother's table. David and Sarah were there too. Everyone acted as if they were oblivious to the giant elephant in the middle of the room. That day, just as she'd promised, Sarah brought the gravy, and Brenda hadn't taken a single spoonful of it. That silent protest was a message more powerful than words. But this year everything was different. This was her Thanksgiving, her house, her rules, her guests. There was no one around the table connected to her by blood. But there was something more than family there. Peggy had driven all the way from Arizona, bringing one of her life-saving peach pies. Frank had graced the table with wooden serving platters he'd made with his own hands. A few of her neighbors from the farmer's market were there, each having brought their own specialty dish. This was a family built not by blood, but by heart. I've learned that true family are the ones who find you in your wreckage and help you build something new from it. They are the people who see you for who you are, who know your scars but don't define you by them. When everyone was seated at the table, there was a moment of silence. Frank looked at Brenda and gave her a nod. All eyes turned to her. In that moment, Brenda stood up. With a wine glass in her hand and a calm smile on her face, she looked at her guests. Life doesn't always deal you the cards you want. Sometimes you look down at your hand and all you see is a wreck. For a long time, that's all I saw. But then I realized that a wreck is also a beginning. It's a chance to clear the ground, to replant, and to wait patiently to see what will grow. Her eyes moved from Peggy to Frank, and then to her other friends. Today, she said, I'm not grateful for what I've lost, but for what I've found. For every single face around this table, I'm grateful because you reminded me of the healing power of kindness, friendship, and a good slice of peach pie. You are my new garden, my new harvest. Cheers to that. As the glasses were raised, there wasn't just a feeling of celebration in the room, but a victory. It was a victory over betrayal, a quiet but magnificent victory over the ghosts of the past, over pain and regret. For Brenda, the American dream was no longer about a house with a white picket fence and a faithful husband. For her, the American dream was the freedom to be reborn from your own ashes, to tend your own garden, and to choose for yourself who you share your Thanksgiving table with. And that's just how life is. Sometimes the deepest wounds bring out our greatest strengths. And sometimes the darkest roads lead us to the brightest dawns. Brenda's story wasn't the story of an end, but of a true beginning.